so much for the introduction, and thank you all for being here. I do love doing the intro section for a conversation like this because I don't have to tell you what ESPN is. I don't have to tell you what Meta is. I think last I checked, Meta had 3 billion monthly active users. And if I do some mental math, I think that means like 6 of you guys are on a Meta platform literally this moment rather than listening to me. So I could not have a better duo to talk about where social media is right now. And more importantly, where it's heading, because it's changing very, very quickly. And so that's where I want to start. We'll dive into kind of what you guys do and your roles at your respective organizations. But I really wanted to start with the changes that we've seen across platforms, let's say a year, which is a very long time in social media time. How different, Omar, is your job, the work you're putting out right now compared to a year ago, and how is it different?
It's pretty different. I think we talk about TikTok a lot, but we probably don't talk about like how TikTok has affected almost every single platform. It's easy to say, oh, it's made Meta really embrace short form video, or YouTube embrace short form video. But even if you open up your Netflix app, you'll click Just for Laughs, which is a TikTok clone of just like the funniest comedy clips. So I think that has been the big embrace over the last year and a half of like short form videos here, and now people are really starting to figure out short form monetization. So I think that is the biggest thing that we're all focusing on right now.
And Matt, how has your advice to partners, to athletes changed from a year ago to now?
Yeah, well, at one point, I think the biggest challenge was becoming a promotion for Mark Zuckerberg versus Elon Musk at one point this year, and our sports team was very much involved in that.
That's a long year.
But no, in all seriousness, I think 5 years ago it was IGTV, and it was horizontal on Instagram, and it was longer form. 3.5 years ago, we launched Reels, obviously as a result of just kind of that explosion of short form. And now I think our best advice is to do that kind of mix of formats, right? So it could be a carousel with a video. It could be the Reel, obviously pushing text with the launch of Threads. So I think our biggest challenge has been trying to help partners, especially in the athlete space, who may not have the same resources as an ESPN, in prioritizing what that looks like. And I think it's good because it's not just pushing one format anymore, but really what works best for you and your brand.
Yeah, so even within Meta, more and more formats seemingly on a monthly basis, even more and more apps, more and more platforms on a monthly basis. So your role at ESPN, how do you think about, just walk me through like what is a day like thinking about programming all of these various platforms in the ways that they like to be programmed?
Yeah, so we kind of have different categories for Twitter/X, Instagram, Facebook, TikTok. I think with Instagram, it can really vary depending on the season. But let's just say we're during an NBA night. Tomorrow's the in-season tournament, or tonight's the in-season tournament. Let's say LeBron and Kevin Durant have a moment. On TikTok, we're probably going to do a nice little cool edit on it, which is going to take 10 to 15 minutes. It's going to look different than what you're seeing on linear. We're going to put it into an editing software. We're going to go to our music library. We're going to put some music on it, some captions to make it really stand out in that TikTok swipe thing. People are very ruthless on short form video, so they're constantly swiping, and you want to give them a reason to stop. On Instagram, we're probably going to take a screenshot of that moment of LeBron and KD kind of looking at each other, and then we'll swipe to the highlight. On Twitter, we're probably going to use one of our favorite things to do is how Twitter users are reacting to the moment. And so we'll take a tweet from either from an athlete, an ESPN talent, and put it on top of that highlight, and it'll be a funny, like, oh, this is what I think LeBron and Kevin Durant said, and it'll be from Stephen A. Smith. And those are kind of the 3 different ways. We try to optimize each platform differently during the, and it can depend on what game's on, what sport's on, or what time of day it really is.
And for you, how are you thinking about, what an athlete should be doing on a daily basis?
Yeah, and I think it depends heavily on what segment you're talking to. So for an athlete, they could share, and oftentimes they do, they have great videographers, editors. They'll share this super highly produced short form video, this like really heroic type content. And then they'll post that, and then they'll just grab their cell phone, talk directly into the camera in the locker room afterwards, and that latter post will perform 50 times better because it is so real and it is so authentic. So For athletes, we kind of, push for more simple content and really push through that kind of raw moments. When you think of a media brand, a league, a team, I think the importance of highlights, especially on a place like Instagram where it does skew a bit younger, is always going to be kind of the staple. But doing so in a way that feels like it can be memeified, it kind of draws attention to it, it's being shared as one of the strongest signals to kind of push that in the algorithm. Those are the things that we probably push more towards the organizations versus an athlete, like I said, who's a bit more raw and unfiltered.
Yeah, you mentioned highlights. Let's talk about that briefly, Omar, because that is where you got your start. Everybody came to know you. You were the highlight guy. So maybe you can give the very quick version of your background with House of Highlights. But B, how have you seen highlights change and the role of highlights, which for a long time that was sports on social media, but now is just a slice of the pie, as you were explaining?
Yeah, so for those that don't know, I was in college in 2014. I started a little Instagram account called House of Highlights because I wanted to share highlights with my friends. And that very quickly turned into an account that had 250,000 followers in 6 months. And then 6 months after that had 1 million followers. And I was lucky enough to have, my idols at the time, Dwayne Wade, LeBron James, follow. I remember calling my dad like, "Dad, do you know who Snoop Dogg is?" And he's like, "I do." And that's when I felt like I made it. So, it was an Instagram account that really blew up. I got a call from Bleacher Report to partner up, and I signed with them and sold the business to Turner and worked there for 3-4 years. Learned a lot about kind of, building this young audience. And we built that young audience through, highlights, but also memes and funny captions. And the whole goal of that account was to be not only just giving you the highlights you want to see in a day, which I don't think people were that great at, surprisingly. It wasn't just the great LeBron dunk. It was like LeBron makes a face and you kind of put a funny caption underneath it. Or maybe there's a fan reaction that I'm seeing before it kind of happens, or before maybe the mainstream media at the time, never noticed it. So the account blew up and now I think has 30, 40, 50 million followers on Instagram, which is really cool to see.
And now you are the mainstream media in many ways, right? So when you come to ESPN, what was your biggest feedback to them around social strategy, or what do you feel like your biggest impact has been on the way they're programming these platforms?
Yeah, it was super interesting because I joined right when the pandemic was kind of starting. So there wasn't really sports to really promote and post, and I kind of had to change how I think on a daily basis. I think one of the big things that we were really embracing was user-generated content, and what we saw is that amazing highlight that might happen in someone's backyard does just as good as maybe a LeBron dunk because there's no barrier to entry. You don't need to have the context of, LeBron and Kevin Durant are the two best players in the world. They're not rivals, but there's kind of a little bit of something there.
History.
Yeah, there's history there, and they've always kind of had to compete for MVPs, and so that makes that highlight work even better than it normally does. Well, if we think about it, a dad maybe dunking on their son in the backyard, that's funny to everybody. So that was something that we really embraced. And then when sports started, it was a lot more on-site opportunities for me of being at a game, and that's when I think January of 2021 I tried to bring fans behind the scenes to an event. So I kind of have this series that I've been doing on TikTok and YouTube and Instagram where I'm like, I was at the Super Bowl and here's what you didn't see on TV. And you kind of have all these funny moments and it's done really well. I think, the average video probably averages 1 to 3 million views a video, which is cool to see.
Yeah. And you mentioned user-generated content. I'm going to ask this question now. I'm probably going to ask it like 3 more times in slightly different ways in the next 20 minutes. But my biggest question around sports on social media is that for a long time, it was the brand name that mattered, right? Even before social media, it was, I'm going to turn on ESPN because I want to watch sports. And even in the early days of Twitter or Instagram, it was, I'm going to follow the big accounts. I'm going to follow the big athletes. I'm going to hear from them. And in, I would say the last year, but the last couple of years, the way people find content on social media has changed dramatically. And so what can athletes do? What athletes and brands and leagues have to do to continue reaching those fans, given that it's not just a matter of seeing who you're following these days?
Post reels. No, at one point I think that was kind of, our push was, hey, you're trying to reach this unconnected audience. That's going to be the best way to do it. That swipe up, as Omar mentioned, is so addictive across platforms, and that can take, that first 3-second hook can really bring people in. I think when we think of athletes, those collaborations that they can do with the organizing bodies around them, we launched collabs in November of 21, I think it was. It quickly became like the most popular type of format that people were using, not only to build their own audience, but, their foundation's audience or their media company or New Heights show. And obviously, like, eventually some of those sub brands almost surpass what the athlete was trying to do themselves, which is great. Since then, we've launched 3+ collaborators. So now you're seeing these posts where it's 4 different users that are all sharing the same type of stuff. I'm not going to say that's always a growth hack, but it does certainly help reach a new audience. And I know we're going to dive a bit into creators, but I think on the league and kind of the IP holder side, we've really dove into the creator first approach because it is bringing that new audience. Omar himself can bring people behind the scenes at NBA finals. How can we do that with maybe a non-endemic sports creator who's bringing that new, younger audience to the in-season tournament in Vegas this week?
Yeah, perfect. You mentioned creators. I think we do actually have a short little clip we're going to show here about ESPN's work with creators. And then I want to talk more about that relationship as well.
Cool.
If we can cue that up.
Just for quick context,
Yeah,
we were doing.
Oh, here it goes.
Oh, sorry about that. We'll just let it play. So for context on that video, late last year and early this year, we had the ESPN Creator Network, which you saw all the 10 folks that were creating different content on behalf of ESPN. The whole idea for us was we wanted to innovate, but also reach a unique audience. It wasn't just basketball or football. It was F1, wrestling, field hockey. We were hitting so many different sports. And what we saw was it increased the brand love. Because people were just so excited that their favorite creator that they love and watch every single day is now at ESPN. They're getting these amazing opportunities through ESPN, and we incorporated them in our content. I think it was an awesome win-win, and so we're going to run it back this year in February 2024 with our sponsor being Adidas, and it's 10 female creators that are kind of up and coming, and the idea is that we'll be able to help them innovate and get better as creators, but they'll be able to teach us some stuff and really help us reach new audiences.
Yeah, it's perfect for this conversation we're having because I think a lot of people would think those creators are your competition, right? Those are people that are competing with you for views, for followers, for attention, maybe copycatting your ideas or vice versa. So why embrace that, or how do you guys think about embracing that and using that to build the ESPN brand rather than seeing it as competition?
Yeah, I think when you see the content that was in that video, you saw how good it came out, whether it was on our TV or network, whether it was on our digital shows. And what we saw at the end of it was doing way more growth than it was actually hurting the brand at all. I think it really is the key right now in content is to embrace younger creators, up-and-coming creators, and bringing them into your brand, because from what we have seen, it has really helped.
I can't speak highly enough about some of the folks that we've been able to work with, especially young women who are creators. I have an anecdote where it was like, I spent a whole day with, a young and up and coming creator. I didn't really notice her taking content throughout, and then I go to, I wish I could say it was a meta platform, but to her Snapchat kind of highlight story afterwards. Throughout the entire time we're together, she's sharing all this behind the scenes footage, kind of like, the Uber we're getting into, like the access that we were able to provide to her, and I didn't even notice her throughout the day. Like, she was very present in the moment, but also able to document it in a way that I wouldn't have been able to. So, we've launched a similar program, our Women's Sports Creator Squad, that we brought to events throughout the year. Many of my colleagues in the crowd were pivotal in that. I think, the one that sticks out to me, Nebraska, Wisconsin, 92,000 fans in Lincoln, and that was the moment in August, and we were able to bring a bunch of, young creators to that to cover from, their own perspective. So as we think about 2024 and beyond, I think we're just going to continue to dive in there, and partners like ESPN doing the same only helps kind of lift the tide there.
So what do creators do for ESPN as a social brand?
Right now, in the Creator Network, you're going to see them involved in some of our linear programs. You're going to see them at events. So we had Tony, who was like an F1 creator last year, and she was able to go to an F1 event in Austin. And we really then work with them to create content around that. And it's interesting to see when you look at the comment sections of those videos, it really is like that person's "you made it" moment. And now we're able, like, for example, we were able to raise awareness for a Monday Night Football game between the Bucks and the Cowboys playoff game. And we had a creator on site. They were making content around it throughout the day. They were talking about how ESPN's the reason they're there. I think I was in some like the selfie videos. It was like a bit funny. So I think it helped raise, there's so many different levers.
Yeah.
You get to create content. You get to promote your events that are coming up. And you also just learn a lot just from the younger generation of sports fans of like, oh, this is what they like doing, or hey, I thought this was a certain type of format that we thought was working. It wasn't working, and now we have a person that can explain to us, hey, this is why this content doesn't work. So it's so many different levers.
what's the point of it all? What's the point of spending this much time on social media as a brand that ideally wants people to watch TV?
Well, so I'll give you some context. When I was in '08, the Miami Heat were not good. They won 15 games. The 2008 Patriots had won 18 games that year. So the Heat were garbage, right? And I was starting to fall out of love with sports. I was playing Call of Duty with my friends way too much, and I had no idea what was going on in the NBA anymore. Now, lo and behold, if I had Instagram at the time, shout out Instagram, and I was keeping it up to date with all of my favorite highlights and everything like that, I would have been more likely to stop on a playoff game. And what we are seeing is if someone is following ESPN on a social media brand, they're more likely to engage with our brand outside of Instagram. They're more likely to download the ESPN app. They're more likely to watch ESPN linear programming. They're more likely to watch our digital shows or check out our YouTube videos. So there is a way there that it really helps and build the brand.
And for you on the partner side, why are people? What's the end goal that people are trying to get to when they're thinking about investing in social media content?
I would love to say audience development and building because that's like our big push, but I think, we'd be lying if monetization wasn't typically the second or third thing that comes up. But we try to push the narrative that, you can build and engage that audience and then the monetization will come. We had, Aaron and Andre here from Travis Kelce's team earlier, and I think they've done a really great job at, building Travis's audiences across all of his kind of accounts, and then using moments, whether it's SNL, whether it's a new love interest, to really help promote him further on some of those monetizable platforms like New Heights, like True Colors' his brand. But I think sometimes we struggle with the fact that, it doesn't come overnight. And oftentimes for athletes, they're so used to being met with a certain threshold of payment that sometimes some of the work to put in on the social side doesn't quite meet what their expectation could be.
Is that changing?
Yeah, I think the short form monetization that Omar mentioned earlier, it's getting better. I think we even heard like on Facebook, which has been disparaged a few times in terms of relevance in this room today. Like we did see and hear from creators, like there was monetizable options on there, whether it was Reels and some of the in-stream products there that younger creators were actually using Facebook because they were making a profit off of the video content there. I think the more that Reels, Shorts, TikTok, Spotlight on Snap can continue kind of sharing and building that rev share model for creators, it'll just continue to grow, and that obviously trickles to athletes and hopefully to the brands that are the biggest producers as well.
I love the way you say audiences, because I think that gets at how different these platforms are. Like talking about social media strategy kind of is silly in itself, right? Because it's like 8 different strategies as you laid out, Omar, and it's different people on these platforms. It's different, oftentimes, end goals on these platforms. I want to know about your research process because these algorithms are changing on a weekly basis.
Yep.
How do you keep up with what's working and making sure that you are continuing to produce the right kind of content in the right place?
You're constantly just trying new stuff. I'll give you an example. Like, there's certain content buckets that I was a believer in that, when I first tried, I was like, oh, this is terrible. This is not going to work at all. But for example, about a year ago, I made a video called "Why Do UFC Fighters Put on Vaseline Before a Fight?" The first time I posted that video, it had 5,000 views. It didn't do anything. And I was like, I really believe in this concept because I was watching a UFC fight and someone mentioned it to me. And then the whole room was like now asking that question. I'm like, it has to work. So then I do a second video. I change the hook. I make it a little bit longer. Instead of 5,000 views, it gets 18,000 views. I'm like, no, that room really cared about this question. I have to go figure this out. So I tried again. I changed the hook. I made the hook like a question. I made the video pretty concise of like all the reasons and then just ended the video immediately. I think on TikTok, that video now has 20 million views. On YouTube, it had 25. On Instagram Reels, it has like 9 or 10. So I think one thing I learned was like content optimization of like, hey, if you have a piece of content that you really, really believe in, if it doesn't do well, try it again in a different way or make some changes to it. So that's kind of how I kind of go about content these days.
Is that what you're seeing people do? Like, how smart are creators getting at figuring these things out over time?
Yeah, and we talked about this prior, but I think one of the tricks, it is a copycat league, and oftentimes it's, hey, go check out what at SportsCenter or at House of Highlights is doing, and you'll see a lot of other brands, athletes go and do that. And imitation is, the sincerest form of flattery or wherever that goes. I think beyond that, continuing to invest in, we call them insights. It's really the data behind it. One of the first things we ask an athlete, if we do see them, hey, are you on a professional account? That opens up the insights so that you can understand your audience, the age, the demographics, the locations. And I wouldn't say it's 50% aren't on them, but a surprisingly high amount are still just on that basic Instagram level, and they're missing out on like droves of information about their own audience, the people that they're reaching. So that's the very basic level, but following those who are producing 30, 40 times a day is definitely a great strategy as well.
Yeah, a quick note on that is like we learn a lot from the insights. So there's a retention graph for every single video we post. And so you can usually see a dip immediately or maybe halfway through a video, and that'll give you all the insight you need to know of like, oh, I lost the audience here. I need to remake this video, or hey, this video isn't going to work because the thesis of it isn't even any good. So I think the analytics, as long as all the social media companies are giving us more and more, it just helps a ton.
In our roles, we really want to take that feedback from ESPN or from athletes and share that back to our product teams and say, hey, this is why we need a Reels API, or this is why we need Reels Insights, because ultimately that's going to unlock more great content. So oftentimes our team on the sports partnership side is going to bat against our own internal meta folks on behalf of the industry, which is super important, obviously.
And how has the audience changed for you? As we mentioned before, ESPN is the largest brand on TikTok now. You have massive followings on a lot of platforms. How is the people that are watching that content, how is that evolving over time? Does it start with diehard ESPN fans? Does it start with people who are younger and it expands older? What's the trend over time with the audience?
Yeah, it definitely depends on the platform, but let's just stick with TikTok. It was super young fans that may not even have loved sports as much. They really cared about what was going on in Fortnite at the time. And so you're like trying to find what is a sports reference. I think LeBron maybe had a character or skin is what they call it in Fortnite, and we're like, this is going to be our angle to really bring in those fans. And now we're seeing with Taylor Swift, like that audience is so big. I think Taylor Swift is probably the most famous person on the internet right now. Not even the internet, just like the world.
Right.
I have like a sister that like has a pop culture account, and like she can't post enough Taylor Swift videos right now. So
I think that's a Taylor Swift fan outside.
yeah, that's right now. Just celebrating.
That's Travis's team trying to avoid the Taylor. There you go.
And so, then we'll lean into that, to her being at games and different. So we try to just find an angle of like what's going on in pop culture that maybe a sports fan doesn't, or maybe someone that isn't interested in sports. How do we bring them into our ecosystem? Because once you click follow, now you're going to get all we post like 60 posts a day, 40 to 60 posts a day. So you're now going to see everything in sports at that point.
See how long this one runs?
Still upset.
Yeah, he's going for the record. I wanted to ask about how the athletes themselves are changing too, because I think when I speak to athletes or watch their content online, this is really the first generation of athletes that have come up watching stuff on TikTok, right? So how has that changed the way they're working with you or the way they're thinking about their own brands because they started as consumers?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think it makes our jobs probably a lot easier. Someone was talking earlier about Peyton Manning and whether he's more relevant now than he was 10 years ago. Peyton Manning launches his Instagram within the last 2 years. I bet him and his team wish they launched it 10 years ago is what I would say there, because a lot of these high school athletes, especially when you consider name, image, and likeness, they're coming into their kind of peak athletic periods with millions of followers. So that obviously shifts what they're able to do on social media. And beyond that, I think the more comfortable they are in front of camera, whether they're recording themselves, doing funny things, kind of fighting through that like tough period of being vulnerable, the better their content's going to perform. And ultimately, like, I often say I wish athletes would make their Finsta content their Insta content, because sometimes their Instagrams can feel so branded and so polished, and then we know, because we get requests, they have a secondary account that is really true to themselves. How can we port that onto their main account, because that's really a true reflection?
Just a quick thing, like when I was at House of Highlights, we used to talk about like how does an athlete do well on the account? Like how do we just make it so more athletes, because we don't want to just rely on LeBron, Steph Curry. We were mainly an NBA account. We only had NBA, right? So that's why I'm mentioning NBA players. And so what we found was like 50% of it was like a player being really good. The other 50% was that person being funny or relatable. Like Trae Young would be at first had his highlights go amazing when he was in college, and then it kind of died down. And the reason they went back up is he would record himself listening to Drake and dancing to Drake, and we would post those videos, and people were like, Trae is just like us, or he's funny. I remember I wasn't the biggest Tom Brady fan. I grew up in Miami, so we would lose to him 2 times a year. And then when Tom Brady had his Instagram account and in his Facebook post, I was like, oh, this guy's actually funny. And so that made me like him, even though he was, responsible for all my sports sadness at that time.
Yeah, I'm a Bills fan, so
Yeah, I'm with you.
we can
You're still
commiserate
working on it.
across
Yeah,
Tom
yeah,
Brady, but obviously
You guys still haven't recovered. 6-6, man. Come on.
everything that they've built with Tom is incredible. So, anytime that you can kind of cut through beyond just the field performance is going to work. We have one great stat, but like the NBA draft, for instance, we pulled data from like 5 years. Players who posted during their NBA draft night saw 77% growth. Those who did not dropped down to like in the 40s. So you can just envision like being ready for that moment is super important, and then being yourself in those moments can even push it further.
Fantastic. I think we're almost out of time, and I'd hate to run over in a topic where we're only talking about short form content. So my last question, and hopefully I can save you some questions that you get a lot, and we can start with you and then come back here. What's the one thing people should be doing to get, I'm sure everyone comes up to you and says, I want to get more views on my content, I want to get more followers. What's the one thing, either content-wise, process-wise, that people should tomorrow start doing, whether it's an athlete, whether it's a league, whatever it is?
Super simple. I caption every piece of content. I think you'd be shocked at how many people scroll their feed with sound off. That's like a super tactical one. Beyond that, join Threads. It's the new conversation platform for text-based conversation. But no, seriously, I think being able to cut through those people who maybe aren't just there swiping through with sound on, you'd be surprised at how many people stick and retain to your audience.
Yeah, same question for you.
Yeah, I think for me, when I was starting House of Highlights, I had a lot of friends that I was encouraging to build an account with me or make their own accounts. They would all start in the first 30 days. There would be no growth, and they would kind of stop and give up. And, I had that issue on my first Instagram account, but by month 6, we started really figuring it out. So I think the thing is, do not give up. Your every month is a different chapter. Even for me, I've had 10 years of experience in social and digital. I was helping out a friend build their account, and that person was thinking, we're going to launch and we're going to be hitting 1 million view videos within the first month. And it took us like 6 months, and that person was ready to quit like 10 times. So it really is a process, and you kind of have to keep sticking with it.
No, both great advice. And I think, as you were saying, even if you're a big brand, if it's maybe a certain kind of content that's not working, or a certain type of format or certain platform that's not working, the stick-to-itiveness and the experimentation, I think, is absolutely vital there.
Totally.
Fantastic. And I'm really excited. I know we talked before. You're going to boost my algorithm on Threads, so I assume I'm already at 1 million followers. I haven't checked quite yet, but
as soon as we hop off the stage.
It's the least you could do. I appreciate it. Thank you guys both. Really appreciate this, and I'm sure we'll be talking about whatever crazy stuff's going on next year too.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, guys.